friends are since.
This is the Dirtywave M8. And if you've watched my channel at all before this point, you'll probably have picked up on the fact that this is one of my all-time favourite devices for making music with. Not only is it really nice and portable and really well built, but it's also extremely powerful, and I honestly, genuinely can't say enough good things about this device. But one of the reasons I think that I personally have gelled with the M8 so much is because when I started making electronic music, I did so primarily using one of these, which is of course a Nintendo Game Boy. But specifically, I'm talking about LSDJ on the Game Boy, which was the kind of tracker-based software that you could get for free, and which the M8 is kind of built upon, and is really, honestly, the spiritual successor to. Now, whilst I really love LSDJ and I have played live with the Game Boy on a number of occasions, it isn't really designed or set up to be optimal for live performance, partly because of the number of limited controls on here. And even though in LSDJ there is a live mode which is similar in the M8, where you can trigger different clips and loops and all that kind of thing, if you want to start, adjusting things on a more granular level, it quickly becomes, quite tricky to do, and that's why you'll see various chiptune artists trying to do lots of interesting creative things in order to make their performance a bit more interesting, as opposed to someone, just standing holding a Game Boy. But this is one area actually that the M8 has got a bit of a trick up its sleeve, and something that I haven't seen too many people discussing, so I wanted to share it with you today. And specifically, I'm talking about the ability to use a third-party or external MIDI controller to modify different parameters within a synth engine on the M8, for example. And this really opens things up, because if you think about it, you could have your main loops on here running, and you could trigger things in live mode and then start adjusting the filter cutoff of one of your synthesizers, or the resonance of another, or the delay, or whatever it might be. And the possibilities for live use are actually pretty exciting. Now, the one caveat with this is that it's not quite as straightforward necessarily as just hooking up a MIDI controller, because we do have MIDI DIN on MIDI jack here, which is brilliant, but a lot of modern controllers, particularly the ones with lots of knobs or twisters or whatever, are all USB MIDI. And so, for example, if we take one of the most common ones that you'll see kicking about, which is this MIDI Fighter Twister, of course this seems like the perfect companion, it's a good size and all that kind of thing, but unfortunately, there's, how do you connect the two of them together? And this is the big kind of challenge if you want to use a USB MIDI controller. Now, the solution to this, which I'm not going to go into in great detail the reasons why this is the case or whatever, but you essentially need a USB MIDI host. And there's various different ones available out there, including the Blockus MIDI USB thing and all that kind of, there's numerous options that you can get. However, the one that I really like, and which I purchased recently from my friends at Signal Sounds, is this wee toty thing. This is the RK-006 from RetroKits. They are well known for making a whole bunch of utility devices and interesting kind of MIDI solutions. And in this case, I think this is just an excellent wee thing, because it can do a whole host of different MIDI USB CV operations in a really tiny package. I mean, it's literally the size of the M8 screen, which is kind of wild, and it makes it the kind of perfect companion, because if you're trying to travel light, as you would if you were doing a gig with something like the M8, then this would be brilliant. Now, what I'm going to do is show you roughly how this is set up, and then I'm going to connect up my camera and all that stuff so you can hear what's going on, and then I'll show you the mapping and the kind of how this would work in practice after that. So the first thing you need to do if you want to operate it in this manner is connect the RK-006 up to power. You can use just a standard 5V kind of USB plug, like you would use for any kind of old Android phone or something like that. You then, within the kit, you get this double-headed cable, which is called an OTG cable, I believe. And basically, this allows you to split out the power and the data. So we plug in the power into it up here, which you can't see. Then we plug in the RK-006 here. You'll see it light up. And then what we do is we plug in our this end of our MIDI controller into the other side of this, which is here. you'll see it is now getting powered up. And the reason you have to use a powered supply for this is to make sure you're getting enough juice to this, because if you try and power everything just off the M8, then it wouldn't work too nicely. Now then what we want to do is we want to plug in one of the outputs from here into the input of the MIDI input on the Dirtywave M8. And because these both have mini jack and both conform to the current standard, then we can just use a standard 3.5mm stereo cable. So in we go, and then in we go. Let's see, output number 10. Now, what should happen when I adjust one of the parameters on here, you should see this light up. Woo! And this tells us that we're getting a MIDI signal in there. Now I'm just going to connect up the M8 to my audio recorder, and then I'll let you hear how this kind of works in practice. So I've kind of rearranged everything so you can hopefully see things a wee bit better, including changing the kind of screen theme and also bringing the camera down. But essentially the workflow that we've got going on, or the signal flow I guess I should say, is that we've got the USB MIDI coming out of the USB MIDI Fighter Twister. It is going into the RK-006, and then it's coming out along this wee pink stereo cable into the MIDI input of the Dirtywave M8. And the process is really as simple as just assigning your different controller, potentiometers or faders or whatever it might be, to specific values within the M8. And that can really be one of many, many different values, or even multiple values at once if you are so inclined. But to kind of demonstrate this, I'll let you hear first some of the synth sounds that I've got that I want to modify. So let's say this chain here. Get a kind of a wee bass line going on. And that's fine on its own, but really, let's say I'm playing live and I wanted to be able to apply a filter to that so that I could bring it in. Well, with this, what I can do is go into the individual instrument, find the filter, pick the kind of filter that I want, set one of these values to cutoff, and to do that, I hold down Option, and I move the potentiometer that I want to correspond to that value, and you can see it lights up and there's a wee confirmation on the screen. And then if I move this, you'll hear that I'm controlling the filter. I can do the same thing obviously for different parameters like resonance, and then we can also do things like delay and reverb. But we can also change things like the timbre, and all these parameters can be assigned. Now the cool thing about this is that it's not limited to just one instrument or anything, so you can assign different MIDI values or controller values to a whole bunch of different instruments. So you could simultaneously change your bass line or your lead line, or you could change things on individual hits of like a snare or a hi-hat or something. So let's say here's my hi-hat pattern, but I wanted to only adjust certain parameters like delay on a particular instrument or a particular hi-hat hit. Then I could go in, find the sample I want. Obviously I will go in and I will assign delay to this one, and then reverb to this one, and then if I Now hopefully you can see why this is so exciting, because if you want to use the M8 live, this means that you're no longer just restricted to using the controls of the device itself, but you can break out all of the different parameters from your instruments and get instant and kind of simultaneous access to all of them at once, which for live performance is just so much better, because it means you can really put much more into both the sound and the kind of tweaking of things as you go, but also the visual aspect of it all. And I'm really personally really excited about this and glad that I managed to get one of these. So you get the idea. That's about as straightforward as it gets, and I'm just going to play this out with a wee jam that I have not rehearsed at all, so it could be a total disaster, but it might give you an idea of some of the, some of the kind of flexibility and excitement of the various knob twiddling possibilities that are now available.